So we're talking about this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and this guy too. I can hear the pitchforks already. I wanted to start this off with a grand statement about creativity and what really makes an idea iconic. I think creators of all mediums know how difficult it is to be able to find inspiration and transmute it effectively for new audiences. We all have movies, songs, or even art pieces that we love, works that we want to share with the world, either just to put those references on display, or because it snatched you by the throat and forced you to bring your vision to light. Now, walking that fine line is hard, but it's what we're all here for. Seeing the ways old ideas inspire the new is a magical thing. It's especially magical in that moment you realize it's being done right in front of your eyes. But this isn't entirely a video about art and inspiration. It's also about influence and pop culture, and it's about the constraints of entertainment media in the US. I'm not here to make a claim on whether this is objectively good or bad representation. I just wanted to know what happens when inspiration comes in the form of an intersectional or cultural identity.
I cried laughing when I you know what I'm saying? like, we need to stay away from these niggas.
Part of the inspiration for this video came from this tweet right here that talks about black cartoon characters in the late 90s and early 2000s. And before you ask, no, I'm not necessarily addressing what this person was saying because this person wasn't making a whole lot of sense, but from the characters listed and presented, it triggered something. As a kid, I was a little confused by the lack of latitude in terms of character archetypes in animation. I'm thankful that today we have so much more representation when it comes to cartoon characters. We've gotten to the point where we can see so many main characters and supporting characters that are black but aren't only characterized by their hairstyles or their exaggerated swagger. Are y'all still referencing that? Yeah, I'm not gonna let that die. TV shows, just like any piece of art or entertainment, are created through a process of regurgitation, and that forces elements like representation to be colored by the era that was consumed prior to it. Today, you might hope that the necessary writers and creatives are on board to be able to pull from aspects of their lives to inform the creation of these new black characters. But back then, it was kind of hard for them to do that because, there wasn't any black people there. As syndicated cartoons continued to take off in the early 90s, there was already a social push to try and be more diverse in the makeup of characters presented on screen. Although there were many reasons, such as the adjusting climate post-civil rights, that contributed to this push, I assume that it was tied to the boom of cable TV in the early 80s that made it a lot more lucrative for production companies to make TV with broader audience appeal. Not necessarily for the black and brown viewers, they didn't care about them, but for the liberal-ish white viewers who definitely don't even see color. I would have loved to talk about TV censorship and how syndication became a form of redlining, but I think that's a conversation for another day. In continuation of that appeal problem, cartoon writers looked to sitcoms to try and walk that all ages tightrope and supplement their knowledge, lack of knowledge of black and brown people. And through that, in the 1990s, we saw the birth of the black boy genius archetype.
Y'all got any cheese?
It's in the fridge.
Did I do that?
Family Matters was a sitcom that premiered in 1989. It was a direct spin-off from the series Perfect Strangers, which isn't a surprise. The family tree of sitcoms in the 70s and 80s are ridiculous. It was produced by Thomas Miller, Robert L. Boyett, William Bickley, and Michael Warren. All four were the creators and producers of Perfect Strangers. The series focused on the Winslows, a middle-class African-American family living in the suburbs of Chicago. It tackled everyday issues like high school drama, peer pressure, and familial disputes. The show leaned on instilling moral values in the closing of pretty much every episode, just like most sitcoms of the era. And I don't say that lightly, these sitcoms are very much rinsing and repeating what every other sitcom was doing. In season 1, the show was just figuring itself out, whether it was going for more of a Cosby Show type affair or whether they would try something wackier. Revisiting this series almost 40 years after feels like a bit of culture shock. Obviously, this was before my time, but what was of my time were the reruns. For me, Family Matters came on sometime during the Nick at Night block on Nickelodeon. It aired from about 5 to 7 in the morning, so on a regular weekday when I would get ready for school and maybe eat breakfast before heading out, Carl Winslow would be on the screen. The back half of season 1 is where the show finally finds its footing and starts to pull away from being labeled the bargain brand Cosby Show. The series topped out in popularity as the 15th highest rated series in the US in 1990, with season 1 ending in that spring and season 2 premiering that fall. And it was season 2 that launched Family Matters into the homes of every American family in the country.
I want a bike. What do you want, Judy? A pony. The kid's got potential.
Even though there had been black sitcoms before Family Matters, series like The Cosby Show focused on presenting black families in a higher middle class look, trying to upend stereotypes. By utilizing its bootstrapisms and conservative messaging, the show was able to become one of the most successful series of the 1980s. Prior to that, series like The Good Times were determined in humanizing black families that were living on the edges of poverty.
I dreamt I was chasing this chick, and her father was chasing me, and the muggers was chasing him, and the police was chasing the muggers, sort of like a ghetto marathon.
Family Matters was one of the first series to squarely present a working class black family. It featured a blue-collar two-parent household with both parents having worked as police officers, although Harriet, the mom, left the force way back in Perfect Strangers. Now again, I was not alive in the 1980s, but I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that this isn't what the homes of black kids living off one parent's income look like in Chicago. But I still think the producers were aiming at showing something a little more relatable than the Huxtables or the Jeffersons. At the time, black sitcoms had the intentions of every other sitcom, to reinforce conservative values and make people laugh. But after The Cosby Show became the TV darling in the mid to late 80s, black sitcoms were in vogue. As a result, we got an era of television that tried to destigmatize black families and showed America the type of blackness that they can see themselves in. And trust me, I get the irony in that statement.
Yo, Wheeler, catch. How you like your new piece, man?
And from there, we got to see a certain supporting character that took America by storm when he was introduced in season 1.
Yes, she's getting ready now. You get that, I've got to go up and help Rachel.
Hi, Mr. Winslow. I'm Steve Urkel.
Yeah, it is the super nerd character that has elevated Family Matters from little more than a moderately successful Friday night bridge between two established programs, Full House and Perfect Strangers, to a bona fide hit. Family Matters is the most popular show in its 8:30 p.m. time period, regularly snaring 25% of the available TV viewers. As the ratings increased, so did Urkel's screen time. Now, by producer's mandate, every script must contain at least a little bit of Urkel. The same accidental lightning that has struck this creative team before on a much larger scale. In 1970, Tom Miller teamed up with Gary Marshall and Edward Milkus to create Happy Days for Paramount. William Bickley and Michael Warren were on the writing staff. Although the 50s comedy originally focused on Ron Howard as Richie Cunningham, Henry Winkler's leather jacket college dropout, Arthur Fonzarelli soon stole the show. That's why producers of family shows usually create 3 or 4 kid roles. Warren said, "It is in hopes that one of them will catch on. In Happy Days, that kid was the Fonz."
Urkel was a phenomenon. Played to perfection by the charismatic Jaleel White, he walked funny, he talked funny, and he demanded your attention whenever he was on screen. Steve Urkel made his first appearance on Family Matters in episode 12 as Laura is preparing for her first school dance and she needs to find a date. Halfway through the episode, Urkel is presented as the weird kid in school and Laura's last result. As the story goes, Urkel was only meant to be an extra, but this episode did so well, the writers were excited and ready to bring the character back for more episodes. It's funny enough, but seeing as Urkel was introduced at the midway point of the first season, it looked like the Family Matters team was still trying to find its groove. Once they found Urkel, they knew they hit gold. Today, when you go and watch Family Matters on streaming, it's available through Disney Plus and Hulu. When you watch season 1, you'll notice that Urkel makes a few random appearances in the beginnings of episodes 7 and 8, but that isn't how it always was. After they decided that Urkel would be brought back for more episodes during season 1, the studio decided to try and seed Steve Urkel into the earlier episodes to make it a more seamless transition. So the original promotional intros for a couple of the earlier episodes were replaced with newer ones of Urkel bothering the Winslow household. As the seasons passed, Urkel became more and more of a focal point of the show. At first, the character's bit was just his social awkwardness, the weird things he did like eating mice or bathing with a duck, but eventually it transformed into the sci-fi world. Steve would invent a bunch of different junkyard gadgets that would do everything from creating an adjustable TV stand to a full-on cloning machine. The character was pretty much limitless.
Kid his age still using bath toys.
Come on, Mr. Quackers. Wow. Good night.
The show ran for 9 total seasons, and with each season the show became less and less about the Winslows and more about Urkel. It still featured the trademark lessons at the end of the episode, but the issues became more abstract and way less grounded. Reading reviews of the show towards the end from old and new reviewers, the show eventually reached its Urkel saturation point well before the series ended. I'm gonna be honest, I've only seen like a small handful of episodes past season 7.
Are you still going by that ridiculous moniker, original gangster dog?
That's OGD to you, and I dropped the Urkel.
In spite of the era that it was created in, Family Matters still found ways to straddle the fence between decoratively black TV fodder and decent social commentary. The Good Cop, Bad Cop episode stands out as a major acknowledgement of racial bias and police brutality. The episode starts with Eddie trying to explain to his dad how he was just racially profiled and wrongfully stopped by the police before Carl insinuates that Eddie must have done something wrong.
Dad, we gotta talk.
Edward, what's the matter?
I got pulled over by the cops.
Did you get a ticket?
You're not gonna even hear me out?
No buts, Edward. I warned you. Now hand over your license.
Eddie, what was the ticket for?
I was on my way to a party in Burlington Heights. I was driving along, minding my own business, when the cops pulled me over.
Son, are you absolutely sure?
Then I asked what the problem was, and one of them told me to shut up. Then he made me get out of the car and lie face down.
That's unusual procedure, unless you provoked it.
Dad, the only reason they pulled me over is because I was a black guy in a white neighborhood.
Carl, this is frightening.
If it happened.
Dad!
Well, son, you lied about your last speeding ticket.
Do you think I would lie about something like this?
Well, I don't know, but I'm gonna check it out.
I hope you do.
Don't worry, Edward, I will.
By the end of the episode though, Carl reads the 2 officers that stopped his son for filth, even though Carl stopped just short of realizing the systemic nature of the issue as well as his own role in continuing to uphold that system.
Just a second, Evans. You know, I really don't know how that badge stays on, because it's pinned to slime.
But still, episodes like Fight the Good Fight in Season 2 showed some of the ways that attitudes towards acknowledging black history are capable of triggering ridicule and social retaliation.
Hey, check it out, man.
Okay, guys, showtime's over. I have vital information to share with you. We're trying to get a Black History class here at school. It'll help us appreciate the past, thereby contributing to the present and preparing us for the future.
Sounds good to me.
Oh, thanks a lot, guys. Well, that was easy.
Hey, my lock is open. Oh my God.
Laura, what's wrong?
If you want Black history, go back to Africa.
The episode centers around Laura fighting to include a Black History section in the school's curriculum, and in the end, all the students are better for it. Yo, time is a flat circle.
Mr. Shimada, I've spoken to several teachers, and we would all welcome the opportunity to present a more balanced view of American history.
Laura, there is a school committee meeting next month. Maybe you could come and recommend that a Black History class be made part of the curriculum.
I'll be there.
It was a mixed bag, and by today's standard, it can't be held up to be as salient as it may have been in the 1990s. I just think that it's important to note that there was an effort made to be socially responsible when speaking to such a large audience, as well as some acknowledgement given towards what Black people were facing in real life.
Put your head on my shoulder.
Yeah, I mean, the rain may fall, but let a smile be your umbrella.
How'd you like an umbrella up your nose?
Sure, Fonz. Whatever.
Before there was Urkel, there was Potsy from Happy Days. Potsy was one of the first iterations of Nerds to be regularly broadcasted on syndicated television. Potsy was a bit of a square, but it was strongly accentuated by his friendships with Ralph and the Fonz. I think on his own, he was just a goofy goober and not necessarily as insufferable as Urkel. He was always ready to sing a song and brought a lot of heart and sincerity to the series. I like to consider Potsy as the nexus point for this type of character. Don't get me wrong, there were earlier or even more enigmatic examples of nerdy characters in pop culture at the time. For instance, Pee Wee Herman's Pee-wee's Big Adventure definitely comes to mind, and especially 1984's Hollywood blockbuster, Revenge of the Nerds. Potsy differs from those before him simply because he didn't solely exist as a vehicle for cringe comedy, or as a way to put nerdy guys beating up jock stories on screen. As the series went on, Potsy fell further into the background as his character went from affable goof to painfully dull punching bag.
Now the stance.
It's him! Screech, can we sit with you?
Well, I guess so, if we can find a table for 18.
Screech mania is all over Bayside like a bad rash. You know, I don't get it. What do they see in him?
After Potsy came Screech Powers, who you might know from Saved by the Bell, but the character really premiered in Good Morning Miss Bliss, Saved by the Bell's short-lived predecessor. Screech was another step closer to Urkel. All the characters of Bayside High would agree that Screech Powers was an oddball. But he was also a legit genius who invented his own robot and could figure out how to work pretty much any machine. Although he was often the butt of the cast's jokes, his role on the series was as Zach Morrison's clumsy sidekick. He was still less bombastic than Steve, but he had a similar innocence that made him just as charming as Potsy. After sifting through producers and actors' accounts of the conveyor belt that was primetime television, I was a little less than surprised to see that there were some connective tissue behind the scenes. Most notably, Happy Days was produced by the exact same team that put together Family Matters. But also, Jaleel White would appear on the Good Morning Miss Bliss pilot 2 years before getting the opportunity to play Steve Urkel. While both Potsy and Screech fit the bill, neither of them carried the torch as far in regards to the iconography of the nerd as Steve. Some characters wear their Urkel influence in an overt way, while most just seem to pull from the essence of what made Urkel and his predecessors work. But make no mistake, Steve Urkel is the touchstone for many memorable nerdy characters to date.
So I can even explain why Steve Urkel worked.
Mm-hmm.
Steve loved cheese, polka. He played the accordion.
Did he eat mice?
He did, yeah, he ate mice. But bottom line is
weird.
Everything about the kid.
He was a weird black guy.
Yeah, everything about him was white and weird.
Yes.
So it made him as a character easy to write for the writers. They were excited now. Like, they were hyped now. They were like, oh, finally.
Blurs didn't exist in the mainstream. There was no
Finally, we got something we can write for.
Right.
And then just, you know.
We're doomed. But don't worry, Urkel. Before they eat our skin, I'll make these monsters pay. That's what Hostile Gutto does.
My name's Irwin, yo!
What?
I said my name's Irwin, not Urkel or Irving or Juanita! I was even your sidekick once on Billy and Mandy. Why don't you remember me, yo?
My memory is not what it used to be.
When I look at more modern examples of the black nerd archetype, there are so many to choose from. Taking a look at a character like Irwin from The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, I see how that first iteration of the concept shaped how writers approached writing this type of character. They knew there was comedy in writing a cowardly lover boy who thought he was the coolest thing ever. My issue appears when the only supporting character that happens to be black is also used as a goofy parody of black culture. It's the racialization of a character that isn't written with any of the social context for these jokes to be relevant. There's just like a certain amorphous blackness ascribed to the character.
Oh, goodness, someone please open a window and vent this nastiness out. Dude!
It's not me, yo! Yo, Billy, check it out! How's this for hip-hop, yo? Uh-oh, 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 uh-oh. The CIA is on to us! Run, girls! You ain't pinning Jack on me, yo!
No! Let him go. He seems to have forgotten this classroom is on the 3rd floor.
At this point now, it's not even a defining character trait and it's nowhere near static. Craig of the Creek has multiple nerdy black characters and they're all nothing alike. Craig and Bernard are different types of nerds and so are Sparkle Cadet and Ren. and I really appreciate that we have continued to see that kind of distinction. Here's an excerpt from the Fairly Odd Parents pitch Bible drafted up in 1999. AJ is an African-American kid who's the smartest youngster in school. Hoping to be the ruler of the universe someday, he's constantly studying, spouting facts, and absorbing information. There's nothing he doesn't know, except how to interact with others. Intellectually, you can't touch him. Socially, he's clueless.
Are you seeing what I'm seeing?
Yeah, dude, a girl who actually likes comic books? What's up with that?
I don't know, but I'm gonna stare at her until she feels so awkward she has to talk to me.
What? AJ, snap out of it. No! I've lost him!
Pitch Bibles aren't law. They're put together in the infant stages of a show to serve as a point of reference to the actual production that is to follow. AJ was a black nerd from the Fairly Odd Parents, the Butch Hartman-led series that ran on Nickelodeon. AJ was originally one of Timmy's best friends and featured predominantly in the early seasons of Fairly Odd Parents. He's a rich, super genius with all types of inventions and a super cool secret lab hidden in his room. I figured for this one we'd start with the inception point of the character, because even though AJ is present in the very beginning of the series, by the time the series hits its groove, AJ and Chester lost a lot of their on-screen time and were relegated to just one-off appearances for jokes. A lot of the characteristics shown in any pitch Bible get changed around as the show is in production, and writers find a more suitable way of bringing that character into the main story. With AJ, before he and Chester were pretty much axed from the series, he seemed like a regular kid who happened to be very smart and liked to let everyone know. But every now and again you get a line like that awkward clip I played earlier. If you want my guess, I think more of the socially awkward jokes and gags that they initially wanted for AJ at the beginning of Fairly Odd Parents ended up being split into Elmer and Sanjay's characters down the line. Now we look towards Hartman's second cartoon, Danny Phantom. Tucker Foley is a 14-year-old kid who goes to Casper High. I didn't know this before, but apparently his name is a combination of the last names of actor Chris Tucker and Axel Foley, Eddie Murphy's character from Beverly Hills Cop. Tucker, along with Sam Manson, are Danny Fenton, our main character's best friends. He is one of the more prominent supporting characters, as he features in pretty much every episode in the show's 3-season run. Tucker was Hartman's second try at creating this kind of character, a black kid who is in love with his gadgets, who is a bit socially disruptive and provides comic relief, and gets clowned for being the weird one. When looking at Tucker, it seems like they kept a lot of that social awkwardness as a core part of his character, but the execution was a little scary though.
Straight. You can just walk into people and take over their bodies from the inside? Yeah, pretty much. Hey, Danny, if you could control a girl for just about 2 minutes.
The actual inception point of this video came a few years ago when I watched Kiki's Danny Phantom retrospective, and they made a comment about Tucker and his general weirdness. They even played that clip I just played. After watching that video, I kinda wondered how that character would come to be, or just plainly how many black characters were on screen and even had this type of character and personality. Like, why would so many BIPOC characters be based around their social awkwardness, their ineffectualness towards women, and then finally their eccentric love of gadgets and gizmos?
Exactly what did happen between you and Penny last Saturday night?
Well, you know, as usual, the ladies were all over me, you know, and I was just chilling, so nothing happened. Penny is a classy lady, and I have nothing but love. I mean...
Race in American Television by David Leonard and Stephanie Troutman Robbins touches on the complex history of black characters on TV and expounds on a form of TV writing that they tagged as categorically ambivalent.
In the aftermath of the civil rights movement, which saw demands for inclusion and equality, television had undergone changes. This more recent history of African Americans on television can be divided into 3 phases: assimilationist, pluralistic, and multiculturalist. The assimilationist perspective embraced a colorblind approach. Racial categories and interracial problems are ignored, or at least inconsequential for the majority of TV episodes. If characters do deal with racism, for instance, the situation is portrayed with either a bitter African-American person who has been a victim of racism and gets over it by the end of the episode, or a white character who is ignorant of African-Americans and becomes informed by the end of the episode. Programs such as I Spy, Mission Impossible, and Designing Women fall under this perspective. The second framework is that of the pluralist, or separate but equal programs. These shows posit African Americans are just like white Americans with just a few, often comedic differences. Several studies support this perspective, as the majority of African American characters on TV in the 1990s were members of the middle class. In addition, African American characters discussed issues also important to white characters, such as business and social concerns. They also tend to essentialize blackness, suggesting that all African Americans experience similar life situations. The third and final lens is multiculturalist, or one where the experiences of African Americans are not only made visible, but also presented in a way that captures the diversity, the humanity, and the intersectionality of the Black community.
While I do like how neatly these categories are laid out, I do just want to point out that I don't think every show falls neatly into one or the other. Many shows like Family Matters or even The Good Times can toggle between the first and second category pretty seamlessly. And that doesn't necessarily speak to how well or poorly each individual storyline was written. I think at this point it's also important to point out that prior to Family Matters and The Cosby Show, there were other Black characters that were pretty popular in the cable watching zeitgeist. Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids was a cartoon that aired starting in 1972, created by, you know who. Disgraced comedian Bill Cosby's life outside of his felonies was dedicated towards codifying the respectability politics and bootstrapisms of the eras that formed him. Before he was Dr. Cliff Huxtable, he was just a comedian, and he came up with the idea of Fat Albert, a clever but pretty common reaction lead in a world full of wacky and charismatic characters. And all of those characters definitely strayed away from the hyper-masculine and one-note depictions of Black cartoons before them, even though there weren't many. I think it's very important to notice that although Fat Albert was a very popular series, it does not have as strong of a lineage stretching forward in time with how Black cartoon characters were represented.
Hey, Heavy Hal! Can I jam with the band?
Yo, 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 join in the show.
Maybe it's the cynic in me, but a small part of me thinks it's because of the characters that are in Fat Albert. Although they leaned into a bit of the more stereotypical depictions of Black characters, the series presented its characters with a lot more complexity and a variety of emotions, perspectives, and skills, as opposed to what a lot of non-Black consumers might have anticipated from a cartoon with Black male characters. Flat out, it just wasn't as relatable or easy to grab onto for other people, and in particular, for the other writers to then project onto their own projects.
When you would get these shows, all the writing staff, they were all white. And then the cast was all Black. Norman Lear and his team were probably the best at mitigating the cultural differences between the writer's room, and the stage, and still coming up with magic. There's even an early episode where Thelma Hopkins comes in the door after like a long day of work and she's exhausted and she's like, "Oy vey." And I look at that now and that's so loud. I was like, they let that Black woman come through the door and just say, "Oy vey," like that was her exhaustion for the day.
Right.
So I just had to take some time out to clarify some points. I'm not making this video to invalidate the experiences of anyone who might relate to or identify with the characterization of Urkel or any of these characters I'm about to mention. I actually think these characters did a lot for moving us towards a more culturally inclusive and accurate future. I'm also not making this video to say that writers are only allowed to write about their own ethno-cultural backgrounds. I just wanted to have a discussion about a trope that we all saw in popular media throughout the 2000s, and also assess areas where having a wider breadth of experiences or understanding could have helped create some more dynamic characters. So I went back and revisited some of the episodes that I remembered AJ having a more prominent role in. I was hoping to just get a better picture of what the initial character of AJ was. And I don't know if it's just me, but it feels like since there wasn't so many episodes that went out of their way to establish AJ and Chester, they lost much of any detail they had from the earlier runs. In my recollection, AJ always felt a little more like a smart aleck who happened to be friends with Timmy largely out of shared social status. And I think I got most of that from the episode Smarty Pants from season 2 of Fairly Odd Parents.
Parents are gonna totally kill me!
Go AJ, 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 go AJ.
The main focus of the episode centers around Timmy wishing to be smarter than AJ after AJ spends the whole day rubbing his test grades in Timmy's face. AJ's pretty ruthless in this episode, and it leads to a bunch of really funny jokes and situations, but after a few days of Timmy rubbing his increased intelligence in AJ's face, Timmy's offered to join AJ to compete on their school's Brainathon team against other schools. But since the fairy's magic cannot be used to cheat or win a competition, Timmy loses all of that information as soon as the game starts. And he's pretty much useless in that whole competition. Overall, I think Fairly OddPants had more of a hands-off approach to race and racial representation in the series. I can't remember in other instances if it was particularly bad representation or just in line with that cultural ambivalence that we spoke about earlier. But I do think that with this episode in mind, Fairly OddParents does a pretty good job at creating character drama that is both relatable and within the scope of what these two characters' perspectives and experiences might have been given other contexts.
I'm sorry I was such a jerk to you. I sort of cheated to make myself seem smarter than I really am.
Yeah, well, maybe you would have let me help you study if I hadn't been so busy gloating.
But you deserve to gloat. Everybody's got something they're good at. You're good at studying, and I'm good at,
playing video games. Did you see how much faster you were than me on that buzzer?
But it doesn't matter. I can't win by cheating. I'm gonna disqualify myself.
I'll be the brains, you be the reflexes. Deal?
Deal.
Whether I like it or not, I often find myself subconsciously docking points whenever a character's source of comedy or drama is based on the character's inherent oddness, or in their circumventing established stereotypes. It's not all of the time, but there are only so many times you can actually make this work. But in Fairly OddParents, they don't seem to come across that too many times. AJ's just rich and he's just smart. He hasn't been working his whole life trying to make something of himself, and he also isn't this overtly weird and awkward kid. He's just AJ. Also, I found this, and it feels like this is the closest acknowledgement of race that I remember seeing from the OG Fairly OddParents.
Aw, that's one sweet whip, yo.
Hey, Chester, the cool is not for you.
Yeah, what's the dilly on him? All disappearing and stizzuff?
Stop that.
Yo, Rem Dog, what's a 411? Yeah.
Knock it off, Uncoolio.
You a wiggity wiggity whack, G.
I asked nicely.
Danny Phantom in particular has a pretty unremarkable approach to the way that it portrays a lot of its characters of different ethnicities, which is obviously weird considering how many BIPOC characters they have in the series. I think Danny Phantom as a whole has so much almost incidental world building that ended up making the show a lot more interesting than the show treated itself at times. It takes that categorical ambivalence to a bit of an extreme, and we end up with characters that are inadvertent stereotypes and just don't speak to or with any of the experiences of being a person with those identities. Like, it's not to say that some of the things Tucker is saying aren't just flat out bad, but being a black kid in, I'm assuming, a still predominantly white town and school, saying the things he's saying feels like cognitive dissonance.
You need a publicist, dude. And you need mouth to mouth.
Dream on, loser.
Tucker Foley, chronic tardiness, talking in class, repeated loitering by the girls' locker room.
There are a few episodes in the show's run that put Tucker in the seat of the antagonist. Episodes like What You Want from Season 1 and King Tut from Season 2. Both episodes' main conflicts are centered around Tucker's feelings of inferiority and jealousy, one in comparison to Danny and his ghost powers, and the other in light of his diminished social status. King Tut stands out the most to me on a rewatch. The plot of the episode is basically about Tucker running for student body president and failing to be acknowledged by any of his peers. Danny and Sam help out as part of his campaign team, but as he tries to get them to adhere to the stances that he wants to take as a candidate, he ends up feeling frustrated and unheard.
It's your new election campaign. You like it? No, that's not the slogan I told you I wanted.
Do you want the jock vote or not?
What I want is for you to listen to me. Can you do that?
The episode pretty much escalates into Tucker receiving powers from an Egyptian ghost who has identified Tucker as the reincarnation of a past pharaoh. And Tucker, with his newfound ghost power, pretty much forces the entire student body into slave labor. On its face, this episode isn't a completely terrible episode. I just feel like with this type of disregard of racial dynamics, but implied acknowledgement of race, you just end up with an episode of television that leaves you scratching your head. Like, this doesn't feel right. The goofy black nerd character created an intersection for writers of other races to be able to write these characters. It gave them a route to pull from their lives and identities easier in a way that felt more relatable, but was still black presenting. Hey, editing chords here. I just wanted to point out a bit of a distinction. I think that there is a clear enough difference between Egyptian American representation in these cartoons versus what I think is actually happening here. Rather than this being an episode that is reflecting on and celebrating or just including Tucker's culture, I think this is more so speaking to that amorphous blackness that a lot of writers wrote from in the 2000s. They're more just seeding this idea that since there is a lack of clarity or visibility, especially at the time in the historical backgrounds of a lot of Black American people, they kind of just posited that, you know, any Black person could be the descendants of kings and pharaohs, even though that is probably geographically and historically inaccurate. So yeah, I just wanted to clear that up because I know some people are probably like, oh no, Tucker is probably part Egyptian, but it's like, I don't think any of that was actually in the series. And there wouldn't be a litany of other cartoons who did the same thing with their Black characters if these writers were actually being that thoughtful. So yeah, back to the video. But then there are characters like Chad LaSalle from Recess who rely heavily on their Urkel influence. I guess it could even be a parody at this point. But the great thing about Chad was he really drew from the heart of the Urkel character.
Hey, Vinny, come on. I'm gonna be late for chess club.
Coming, Chad. See you later, guys. I gotta go.
Chad LaSalle is Vince's older brother. He made his first appearance in the season 1 episode Big Brother Chad. If you don't remember Recess, Vince played the role of the hyper-competitive athletic friend. He's considered cool by any metric you could name. He has so much charisma, but I feel like the way that the show wrote him, at least from my memory, still, they let him be a kid without feeling like a caricature.
You hear that? Vince's big brother Chad is coming by after school. Guess what I just heard? Chad is coming. He'll be here after school. Chad? I remember him from when I was in 1st grade. Oh, what a hunk.
I remember once when I was a mere 4th grader. Chad actually spoke to me.
It's almost like a verbal history how they're passing down tales of Chad's actions when he was in grade school. And luckily for everyone, Chad was on his way there. When Chad comes to pick up Vince from school, the whole class is dismayed to see that Chad isn't as cool as they remembered him to be. The episode kinda got me a little sad because Vince at first just sees his older brother. But all it takes is the less than positive comments from his friends to slowly chip away at his respect and admiration for Chad. Surely after he gets home, he's questioning everything and wondering when his own nerd transformation will begin. This nigga was fighting demons. The great thing about this show, and it's really reflective in this episode, is that they don't lean on the characteristics of the person that they're building. Chad is a nerd and a geek, but that doesn't make him unsociable. And that doesn't make him say off-putting and inappropriate things, and it also doesn't mean that he's insecure about his social status. Chad is in chess clubs and geek clubs, he's on message boards and chat rooms online with his friends. His characteristics as a nerd are not something that he has to be ashamed of. And the lesson of this episode is for Vince to come to terms with realizing that there's nothing wrong with having different interests. As a matter of fact, being a nerd doesn't make it impossible for you to be cool, as we see with Chad punking the Kowalski brothers at the end of the episode. I think what makes Chad work and Recess's approach overall is that they weren't afraid to characterize Chad. It's not just about his juxtaposition in a normal society. It's not just about him being the converse of what you would expect from this kind of character. It's just Chad, an actual real person.
Chad, can we talk?
Sure, what's on your mind?
I really don't know how to say this, but I've just been noticing that, well, that you're a geek.
Yeah, so?
But you always did cool stuff, and you always knew everything, and you always...
Sorry, Vince, but I am what I am. And the fact is, I'm a geek.
So, you've been giving my little brother a hard time, eh?
Hey, look, I think this is just a big misunderstanding.
Hey! Leave those kids alone.
Save yourself, Chad. I can only hold him back so long.
Pardon me, Si. Leave those kids alone. And if I don't? If you don't, you can just forget about me helping you with your math homework anymore.
So cool. Hey, just because I'm a geek doesn't mean I'm not a cool geek. Come on, I'll give you a ride home in the old Chadmobile.
Videos like these don't always land gracefully. When I started writing this script, I didn't necessarily come at this to completely refute and devalue the space for Black nerd characters. I also didn't want to necessarily say that there had to be a right and wrong way to display these types of characters, or even how to create a Black character. To be quite honest, this video started with just a question and wondering why that type of character was so prominent. And it was especially interesting for me when I could see how quickly a pop culture representation of a Black character would continue to have residual effects on the ways that Black characters are represented in media for decades. I know that there may be more to dig into on a granular level, but I do think that when you take the appropriate amount of steps back and even retrace your steps to see what and where these characters may be drawing their influence from, you start to see some pretty enlightening patterns. I think the biggest takeaway that I walk away from all this research with is that I'm really appreciative that we have more Black people writing Black characters. I'm not sure if I have much else than that, but if you really want to not only represent a demographic, but actually inspire and create a channel of relatability, the inception point for those characters should be from a point of understanding. So yeah, that's all I have to say for this one. If you feel like I missed anything, please feel free to leave a comment down below. And if you like the video, don't forget to like the video. And if you really rock with me, go and check out my last video on noir-inspired cartoons. I put just as much work into that one as I did with this one, and I'm sure you'll love it too. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.